Welcome to Potter Nexus, the place where magic bends, destiny fractures, and forgotten choices return to haunt the future. Time is not a straight line. It is a wound, and some wounds refuse to heal. Long before the Dark Lord rose, before Azkaban shattered minds and loyalty turned into madness, there was a girl named Bellatrix Black, brilliant, proud, and burning with a desperate need to belong. And far in the future, there was a man named Harry Potter, a survivor of wars that never truly ended, a hero burdened by one question that refused to die. What if one soul had been saved? Could everything have changed? When ancient magic tears open the past, Harry is cast into the Marauders era, a world of laughter, rivalry, reckless youth, and choices that will one day drown the wizarding world in blood. But Harry is not here to observe history. He is here to break it, to stand between Bellatrix and the darkness whispering her name, to challenge destiny before it hardens into tragedy, and to uncover a terrifying truth. Some souls are not born evil. They are forged by the choices others make for them. This is not just a story of love or heroism. This is a story of redemption, obsession, fate, and consequence. This is the moment the wizarding world almost changed forever. Chapter 1. The Veil's Mercy. The air in the Department of Mysteries didn't just hang, it suffocated. It was a thick, cloying soup of ozone, ancient dust, and the copper tang of spilled blood. Harry Potter, 18 and already feeling a century old, stood before the veil. The battle at the Ministry had long since ended in the history books, but for Harry, the ghosts never truly left. He wasn't here to fight Death Eaters today. He was here because the hollow ache in his chest, the one carved out by Sirius, Remus, and Tonks, had become a cavern he could no longer bridge. In his hand, the resurrection stone felt cold, a pebble of concentrated grief. He didn't want to see them as shades. He wanted to stop the rot before it started. "You're being a fool, Potter," he whispered to the empty, rotating room. He didn't step toward the archway. He stepped into the magical resin, ants left behind by a shattered time-turner he'd retrieved from the ruins of the Battle of Hogwarts. He combined it with a localized Elder Wand pulse, a feat of raw, desperate magic that defied every law Hermione had ever quoted to him. He wasn't just turning back the clock, he was punching a hole through the fabric of what is, to reach what was. The world didn't fade, it tore. The sensation was like being flayed by frozen needles. Harry felt his atoms scatter across the decades. He saw the face of a young Bellatrix Black, not the hollowed-out, shrieking banshee of Azkaban, but a girl with sharp, intelligent eyes and a pride that hadn't yet turned to madness. "I can fix it," he thought, his consciousness fraying. "I can pull her back from the edge." He collapsed onto a cold stone floor. The smell was different here, wax candles, expensive incense, and the sharp, clean scent of a mountain winter. "Who the devil are you?" The voice was haughty, melodic, and terrifyingly familiar. Harry looked up, his vision swimming. He wasn't in the Ministry. He was in a lavishly appointed drawing room, the Black family crest looming over the fireplace. Standing over him, wand leveled at his throat with lethal precision, was Bellatrix. She looked 18. Her hair was a wild, dark halo, and her eyes, though suspicious, were sane. "Speak," she hissed, the tip of her wand glowing a faint, dangerous violet. "Or I'll see what color your insides are." Harry coughed, tasting blood. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the tragedy yet to happen. "My name is Harry," he croaked, pushing himself up despite the screaming pain in his ribs. "And I'm the man who's going to keep you from losing your soul." Bellatrix laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. "My soul is quite intact, stranger. It's your life that's currently in jeopardy. You've breached the wards of Black Manor. That's a death sentence. Then carry it out," Harry challenged, his eyes flashing with the power of the Master of Death, even in his weakened state. "Or listen to me for 5 minutes. If I'm lying, you can let your Dark Lord have me. But if I'm right, you might just live to see a world where you aren't a monster." She hesitated. The mention of the Dark Lord, a title only the inner circle was beginning to use in this era, made her flinch. She saw something in Harry's gaze that shouldn't exist in a boy his age, a weary, absolute authority. "You have 5 minutes, she whispered, her wand never wavering. "Make them count." Harry began to speak, weaving a tale of a future built on ash, of a war that would consume her sisters and leave her rotting in a cell for a man who would never love her. He told her about Andromeda's flight and Narcissus' cold desperation. As he spoke, the walls of the manor seemed to shrink. the weight of the Black legacy pressing down on them both. He wasn't just a traveler, he was a ghost from a future she hadn't earned yet. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2. The Weight of Silver and Silk. The silence in the Black Manor drawing room was heavy, thick enough to be felt against the skin. Bellatrix didn't move, her wand remained steady, but the fire in her eyes had shifted from murderous intent to a cold, calculating curiosity. She watched the stranger, this, Harry, who looked as though he had been dragged through a battlefield and back again. You speak of my sisters as if they are pawns in a game you've already finished. Bellatrix said, her voice dropping to a dangerous purr. Andromeda is a fool, but she is a Black. Narcissa is a child, and I am the chosen of the Lord. Why shoal? I believe the ravings of a half-dead vagrant. Harry managed to sit up, leaning his back against a mahogany sideboard. Every breath felt like inhaling ground glass. Because you already feel it, don't you? The Lord doesn't want an equal. He wants a weapon. He wants you to carve out your heart so he can replace it with his brand. He reached into his pocket, his fingers trembling, and pulled out a small, circular object. It wasn't the resurrection stone, that was gone, lost in the transit, but a heavy gold locket. It was a replica he'd kept, but it bore the unmistakable mark of Slytherin. Bellatrix gasped, the tip of her wand dipping an inch. Where did you get that? That belongs to a man who would see you die for a cause that ends in his own pathetic demise, Harry interrupted. Yo, you think you're fighting for blood purity. You think you're reclaiming the glory of the ancient houses. But he's just a half-blood orphan named Tom who hates himself so much he wants to burn the world down to hide his origins. The air in the room suddenly turned freezing. Bellatrix's face went pale, her knuckles white around her wand. To speak such heresy was to invite a slow death. You lie, she breathed, though the conviction was starting to fray at the edges. He is the heir. He is the one who will lead us. I know his secrets, Bella, Harry said, using the name only her family used, watching her flinch. I know about the cave. I know about the ring. I know that right now, he's grooming you to be the first to fall in his name. You want power. I can give you power. But not the kind leaves you screaming in a cell for 15 years until you can't remember the sound of your own mother's voice. He saw the flicker of fear. It was brief, hidden behind years of pureblood conditioning, but it was there. She was 18, poised on the edge of a precipice, and for the first time in her life, someone was showing her the jagged rocks at the bottom. Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why come back for me? Why not save your own parents? Why not kill him before he rises? Harry looked at his hands, scarred with the words I must not tell lies. Because you were the one who broke the world the most. And because if I can save the worst of us, then maybe there's hope for the rest of them. Besides, he looked up, a ghost of a smirk playing on his lips, I've seen what you become. Underneath the madness, you were the most brilliant witch of your age. It's a waste to let that burn out in a madman's service. Bellatrix lowered her wand fully now, though she didn't stow it. She paced the room like a caged panther, her silk robes hissing against the floor. The weight of the Black family legacy, represented by the grim portraits of ancestors staring down from the walls, seemed to suffocate her. If what you say is true, she said, stopping in front of a tall mirror, then I am already a prisoner. My parents have already promised my hand to Rodolphus Lestrange. The Dark Lord already expects my initiation. There is no path out. There is always a path, Harry said, standing up with a grunt of pain. He reached out a hand. But you have to trust someone who isn't a Black, and someone who isn't a monster. You have to trust a Potter. Bellatrix turned, her eyes wide. A Potter. The blood traitors. The ones who survived, Harry countered. Just then, the heavy OA-K doors of the drawing room creaked open. A young man with messy black hair and an arrogant tilt to his shoulders walked in, followed by a somber, gray-eyed boy. Harry's heart nearly stopped. It was James and Sirius. Younger than he had ever seen them, yet so hauntingly familiar. Bella, Mother said you were brooding in here again, the younger Sirius said, then stopped dead when he saw Harry. Who the hell is this? And why does he look like James after a bender? James Potter stepped forward, squinting at Harry. He does look like me. Is that a cousin we don't talk about? Is this one of those dark arts accidents you lot are always having? Bellatrix looked from Harry to James, then back again. The resemblance was undeniable, yet Harry's eyes, bright, emerald green, were something entirely different. They were eyes that had seen the end of the world. He's a guest, Bellatrix said suddenly, her voice regaining its iron chill. She stepped between Harry and her cousins. And if her of you breathes a word of his presence to my father, I'll ensure your next Quidditch match is played without the use of your legs. Sirius smirked, though his eyes remained wary. Charming as always, cousin. But he's bleeding on the rug. House elves won't like that. Harry felt the world tilt. The strain of the journey and the shock of seeing his father were too much. As he began to collapse, he felt a surprisingly strong pair of hands catch him. Not James, not Sirius, but Bellatrix. Don't die yet, Potter, she hissed in his ear. I haven't decided if I believe you. And I certainly haven't learned how to kill a Dark Lord. As darkness claimed him, Harry knew the first ripple had been made. The timeline was no longer a straight line, it was a storm. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. The Lion in the Snake's Den. Waking up in Black Manor was like waking up inside a tomb designed by a jeweler. The ceiling was a fresco of night skies and silver constellations, but the air tasted of ancient enchantments and stagnant pride. Harry tried to sit up, his muscles screaming in protest. A firm hand pressed against his shoulder, pinning him back to the silk sheets. Stay down, you absolute lunatic, Bellatrix hissed. She wasn't wearing her formal robes anymore. She was in a simpler black dress, her sleeves rolled up to reveal pale, unblemished forearms. No dark mark, not yet. She was holding a vial of shimmering purple liquid, a high-grade blood-replenishing potion. Drink, she commanded. Harry swallowed the bitter draught, feeling the heat spread through his limbs. He looked around. Where are the others? Sirius, James, I sent them away, Bellatrix said, her eyes narrowing. I told them you were a distant, disgraced relative of the Peverell line I found wandering the grounds. Sirius was too busy being a nuisance to care, but James, he looked at you as if he were looking into a mirror that showed him a war he wasn't ready for. She sat on the edge of the bed, spinning her wand between her fingers. You mentioned the cave, you mentioned a locket, you mentioned things that only the Dark Lord's inner circle, those he trusts most, could possibly know. Yet you are a Potter. Or at least, you carry the blood. I'm a Potter, Harry said, his voice stronger. But in my time, I was also the ward of Albus Dumbledore. I spent my youth hunting the pieces of Tom Riddle's soul. Bellatrix winced at the name. Don't call him that. The name has, wait. It's just a name, Bellatrix. He's a man who feared death so much he turned himself into a monster. And he's going to use you to do his dirty work. He's going to ask you to kill, and you'll do it because you think it makes you powerful. But it only makes you his slave. Bellatrix stood up abruptly, pacing the small, ornate guest room. And what is the alternative? My father has already signed the contracts for my marriage to Rodolphus. The Dark Lord has already invited me to a gathering, this Friday. To refuse is to bring ruin upon the House of Black. My mother would see me disowned. My father would see me dead. Then let them, Harry said, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. The House of Black is a sinking ship, Bella. You can stay on board and drown with the rest of them, or you can jump and learn how to swim. With you, she turned, a mocking smile on her lips, though her eyes were desperate. Boy who looks like my cousin and talks like a prophet. You don't even have a wand. Harry looked at his empty hands. The Elder Wand had vanished during the jump, likely returned to Dumbledore's possession in this era, or lost to the void. But he still felt the hum of magic in his veins. He didn't need a focus as much as others did, he had survived a killing curse twice. He was magic. I don't need a wand to show you the truth, Harry said. He stood up, towering over her despite his injuries. Take me to the gathering. Let me see him. Let me show you what he really is before he puts that brand on your arm. You'd be killed the moment you stepped into the room, she whispered. He senses everything. He'll rip your mind apart. Let him try, Harry replied, a coldness entering his voice that made Bellatrix shiver. He's fought a boy. He's fought an old man. But he's never fought someone who has already died for the world he's trying to build. Bellatrix looked at him for a long time. She saw the scars, the haunted look in his emerald eyes, and the strange, magnetic power he radiated. For the first time in her life, she felt a spark of something other than duty or fear. She felt rebellion. The gathering is at Malfoy Manor, she said, her voice steadying. Abraxas Malfoy is hosting. If I take you, I'll have to dress you as a servant. Or a consort. Given your face, a distant cousin might work. But you'll need to keep your head down. I've spent my whole life with people staring at me, Bellatrix. Keeping my head down is the one thing I'm actually good at. Don't lie to me, Potter, she said, reaching out to touch the lightning bolt scar on his forehead, which was red and angry from the time travel. You were born to be at the center of the storm. The door burst open then, and a young, lithe girl with blonde hair and a cold, aristocratic beauty stepped in. Narcissa. She looked at Harry, then at Bellatrix, her eyes widening. Bella, Mother is asking why the guest wing is locked. And who is? She stopped, her gaze fixing on Harry's face. James. No. You're too old. Who are you? He's the man who's going to save this family, Sissy, Bellatrix said, her voice sounding more like the leader she was meant to be than the follower she was being forced to become. Now, get me some of Father's old travel robes. The ones without the crest. We have a party to attend. Narcissa looked terrified, but the authority in Bellatrix's voice was absolute. As she hurried away, Harry turned to Bellatrix. You're taking a huge risk, Harry noted. I've spent 18 years playing it safe and doing what I'm told. Bellatrix said, a wild, dangerous glint appearing in her dark eyes, the first hint of the woman Harry knew, but directed toward a different end. I think it's time I started making my own mistakes. Harry nodded. He knew the path ahead was paved with blood, but as he watched Bellatrix Black prepared to defy her destiny, he felt the first flicker of hope. He wasn't just here to kill Voldemort. He was here to rewrite the souls of the people who made him. End of Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Serpent's Gala. Malfoy Manor in the 1970s was a different beast than the cold, dread-filled prison Harry remembered from his hunt for the Horcruxes. Here, it was a palace of opulence, dripping with gold, peacock feathers, and the sickeningly sweet scent of expensive lilies. Chandeliers hummed with a low-level levitation charm, and the air was alive with the tinkling of crystal and the hushed, conspiratorial whispers of the wizarding elite. Harry walked 3 paces behind Bellatrix, dressed in heavy, charcoal gray robes that hid his build and shadowed his face. He kept his eyes cast down, playing the part of a silent bodyguard cousin, but his senses were dialed to a breaking point. Keep your temper in check, Bellatrix breathed over her shoulder, her voice barely audible over the string quartet playing in the ballroom. The air is thin here. One wrong word and the Malfoy wards will crush you before the Dark Lord even draws his wand. I've dealt with Malfoys before, Harry muttered back. They're mostly lace and posture. Not Abraxas, she warned. He's a predator. And Lucius. Lucius is eager to prove he's more than just an heir. As they entered the main hall, Harry saw him. Not the snake-like monster of the graveyard, but a man in his prime. Tom Ree, DDLE, Lord Voldemort, stood near the fireplace, surrounded by a circle of sycophants. He was handsome, in a sharp, unsettling way, his eyes dark and piercing, though a flicker of crimson occasionally NCED in the pupils when the light hit them just right. Bellatrix stiffened. Harry could feel the vibration of her fear, and her attraction. It was a toxic cocktail. This was the man who promised her greatness. Who whispered that her blood made her a goddess among insects. Ah, Bellatrix, Voldemort's voice drifted across the room, smooth as aged brandy. I was beginning to think the House of Black had grown weary of our cause. Bellatrix stepped forward, dropping into a deep, graceful curtsy. Never, my lord, I was merely ensuring our interests were protected. Voldemort's gaze shifted to the figure behind her. Harry felt a mental probe, sharp, cold, and invasive, slam into his mind. It was a legilimency attack that would have leveled an ordinary wizard. Harry didn't fight it with a wall, he fought it with a labyrinth. He channeled the memory of the veil, the cold emptiness of the Department of Mysteries, and the overwhelming grief of Sirius's death. Voldemort flinched, his eyes narrowing. The connection snapped. And who is this? Voldemort asked, his tone dropping an octave. He carries a heavy shadow for one so young. A cousin from the French branch, my lord, Bellatrix lied effortlessly. Though Harry saw her hand tremble against her skirts. Marius Black, he has been traveling. His mind is a bit fractured by the things he has seen in the East. Voldemort walked toward them, the crowd parting like the Red Sea. He stopped inches from Harry. The smell of him was like cold ash. The East. There are magics there that even I have yet to fully master. Tell me, Marius, W. Had is the greatest truth you learned in your travels. Harry raised his head slowly. He didn't look at the floor anymore. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who had murdered his parents. He saw the flicker of recognition in Voldemort's expression, not of Harry himself, but of a soul that had crossed the threshold of death and returned. I learned, Harry said, his voice steady and devoid of fear, that no matter how many pieces you cut your soul into, the hole in the center only gets larger. And eventually, the wind starts to howl through it. The room went deathly silent. Abraxas Malfoy dropped his glass, the crystal shattering on the marble floor. Bellatrix looked as though she might faint. Voldemort didn't lash out. He tilted his head, a predatory curiosity lighting up his face. A philosopher, or a fool, usually, they are the same thing. You speak of souls as if you've handled them, boy. I've handled the consequences of them, Harry replied. And I've seen where your path ends, Tom. It's a very small, very loud place. The use of his birth name was a physical blow. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost began to bloom on the windows. Voldemort's hand flew to his wand, but Harry didn't move. He stood there, an anchor in the storm, his green eyes burning with a light that seemed to draw the shadows out of the corners. You dare, Voldemort hissed, the sheer pressure of his magic making the younger guests fall to their knees. I dare because I've already seen you lose, Harry said. He turned to Bellatrix, who was paralyzed. He isn't a god, Bella. He's just a man who's terrified of the dark. Look at him, look at the way he reacts when his mask is pulled back. Is this what you want to kneel to? Bellatrix looked at Voldemort, then at Harry. The spell was breaking. The charismatic leader was being replaced by a snarling, panicked sorcerer. Crucio! Voldemort roared. Harry didn't dodge. He caught the spell on the edge of a localized shield, not a protega, but a ripple of raw, ancient magic he had learned from the Peverell journals. The red light splashed harmlessly against the air. We're leaving, Harry said, grabbing Bellatrix's arm. Kill them, Voldemort screamed to his followers. Kill them both. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Spells flew like tracer fire. Harry pulled Bellatrix behind a marble pillar just as a killing curse pulverized the stone where her head had been a second before. You're insane, Bellatrix shouted over the noise, her wand finally in her hand. You've declared war on him in the middle of his own fortress. Better now than when he's got his foot on your neck. Harry yelled back. He pointed his hand toward the massive chandelier. Without a wand, he let out a pulse of pure kinetic energy. The gold and crystal structure tore from the ceiling, crashing down into the center of the Death Eaters. In the confusion, Harry dragged Bellatrix toward the exit, but standing in their way was a young Lucius Malfoy, his face pale but determined. You aren't leaving, Lucius said, his wand leveled at Harry's chest. My father will have my head if I let a traitor walk out that door. Lucius, move, Bellatrix warned, her eyes flashing with a new, dangerous clarity, or I'll show you why I was always better at dueling than you. Lucius hesitated. In that moment of doubt, the doors burst open. Sirius and James Potter charged in, wands blazing. Found them, Sirius yelled, sending a blasting curse into a group of Rosier. Told you she was up to something mental, James. Less talking, more hexing. James shouted, his eyes wide as he saw Harry. Come on, we've got the carriage waiting at the gates. The Marauders had arrived, and the timeline didn't just ripple, it shattered. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. The Lion and the Serpent's Flight. The air outside Malfoy Manor was a freezing shock compared to the suffocating heat of the ballroom. Harry, Bellatrix, James, and Sirius sprinted across the manicured lawns, the grass crunching under their boots like breaking glass. Behind them, the manor was a hive of angry light, spells shattering windows and illuminating the night in rhythmic flashes of green and red. Over the wards, Sirius yelled, his leather jacket flapping in the wind. The carriage is just beyond the iron gates. How did you even find us? Bellatrix demanded, her hair a wild tangle, her chest heaving as she ran. She looked back over her shoulder, her eyes wide with the realization of what she had just walked away from. You left a trail of pureblood drama a mile wide, Bella. James shouted, grinning despite the life or death stakes. He threw a stunning spell over his shoulder at a pursuing shadow. And Sirius recognized the Marauders Black cover. You used that when we played spies at age 7. A jet of green light hissed past Harry's ear, incinerating a rosebush to his left. He skidded to a halt, turning back toward the manor. Voldemort hadn't stepped out yet, his pride wooden. Let him chase them like a common enforcer, but his inner circle was closing in. Mulciber, Dolohov, and a young, terrified-looking Avery were gaining ground. Go, Harry commanded, pushing Bellatrix toward the cousins. What are you doing? she cried out, giving you a head start. Harry's hands began to glow with a soft, ethereal light. He didn't have a wand, but he had the memory of the Elder Wand's resonance. He slammed his palms into the earth. Tear asunder. Quote, the ground between the fleeing group and the Death Eaters erupted. A massive fissure tore through the Malfoy estate, throwing the pursuers into a trench of mud and stone. The sheer force of the wandless magic sent a shockwave that rattled the manor's foundations. James stared, his mouth agape. Bloody hell, who is this guy? Move, Potter. Bellatrix grabbed James by the collar and hauled him toward the gates. They vaulted over the perimeter line just as the carriage, a sleek, black vehicle pulled by 4 invisible thestrals, screeched to a halt. Sirius dived into the driver's seat, grabbing the reins. Harry tumbled in last, Bellatrix pulling him through the door just as a barrage of curses slammed into the carriage's reinforced wooden sides. Fly, Sirius roared, snapping the reins. The thestrals took to the sky, their skeletal wings beating against the cold night air. Below, the lights of Malfoy Manor receded into the darkness. But the atmosphere inside the carriage was electric. James was sitting opposite Harry, his wand still out, his eyes darting between Harry's face and the scar on his forehead. All right, explanation time. You look like me, you use magic like a god, and you just convinced the most loyal Black in history to spit in the Dark Lord's face. Who are you? Harry looked at Bellatrix. She was shaking, her hands clenched in her lap. The reality of her defection was setting in. She had just abandoned her family, her betrothal, and the favor of the most powerful dark wizard in a century. I'm a traveler, Harry said quietly, his voice weary, and I'm the one who knows how this war ends if we don't change the players. He called you Tom, Bellatrix whispered, looking at Harry with a mix of awe and terror. Nobody calls him that. How do you know that name? Because he's not a Dark Lord yet, Harry replied. He's a man who made himself a monster because he was afraid of being ordinary. And he's going to use the House of Black to build his throne unless you stop him. Sirius leaned through the small window from the driver's bench. I don't know who you are, mate, but any enemy of the Dark Lord is a friend of mine. My parents are going to lose their minds when they find out Bella's gone rogue. They can't go back to the manor, Harry said, looking at James and then Sirius. None of you can. Voldemort will mark you all now. He knows I'm with you. The Potter cottage in Godric's Hollow, James said, his expression turning uncharacteristically serious. My parents, Fleamont and Euphemia, they've got the wards up. They'll take us in, even a Black. He looked at Bellatrix with a tentative smirk. Though we might have to hide the silver. Bellatrix didn't snap back. She looked out the window at the passing clouds. I have nothing left, she said, her voice hollow. Everything I was taught, everything I was promised, it's gone. Harry reached out, hesitating before placing a hand over hers. You have a choice now, Bellatrix. For the first time in your life, your fate isn't a contract signed by your father. That's not, nothing, that's everything. She looked at his hand, then up into his emerald eyes. The madness that Harry remembered from his own time, the cackling, cruel Bellatrix, was nowhere to be seen. In its place was a girl who had been given a glimpse of the abyss and chose to step back. Where do we start? She asked. We start, Harry said, by finding a wand for me. And then, we go to Hogwarts. There's a headmaster who owes me a very long conversation. As the carriage soared toward the West Country, Harry felt the first true shift in the timeline. The Marauders were united, Bellatrix was a rebel, and the Dark Lord had been insulted in his own home. The pieces were moving, but Harry knew Voldemort wouldn't stay humiliated for long. The real war had just begun. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6. The Potter Sanctuary. The landing at Godric's Hollow was anything but graceful. The thestral-drawn carriage skidded across the frosted grass of the Potter estate, coming to a halt before a manor that breathed warmth and ancient, golden magic. Unlike the oppressive shadow of Black Manor or the sterile vanity of Malfoy Manor, this house felt alive with the hum of 1,000 domestic charms and a history of laughter. Dad, Mum, don't hex us, it's just me, James yelled, leaping from the carriage before it had even fully stopped. The front doors swung open, revealing Fleamont Potter, a man with the same untamable hair as James but with eyes that held the weight of a seasoned potioneer. Beside him stood Euphemia, her expression shifting from maternal worry to sheer shock as she saw the group piling out of the vehicle. James, Sirius, what on earth? Euphemia stopped mid-sentence, her gaze landing on Harry. She gasped, clutching her husband's arm. Fleamont, look at his face. Harry stepped into the light of the porch lanterns. He felt a lump form in his throat. These were his grandparents, people who, in his timeline, had died of dragon pox before he was even born. Seeing them alive was a more potent magic than anything Voldemort could conjure. I know, Harry said softly, his voice thick. It's a long story, and he's brought a black. Sirius added, gesturing to Bellatrix, who stood near the carriage wheels, looking like she wanted to evaporate into the night. She looked small, her pride replaced by a defensive, brittle posture. Bellatrix. Fleement's eyebrows shot up, the eldest daughter of Cygnus. James, explain yourself. She's with us, Dad, James said, his usual bravado softened by the gravity of the night. She's done with the Dark Lord. And this man, Marius, or Harry, or whoever he is, he saved us. He stood up to Riddle. He took a cruciatus like it was a tickling charm. Fleement looked at Harry, his eyes narrowing with a sharp, analytical intelligence. He saw the scars, the haunted depth of Harry's eyes, and the way the air seemed to bend around him. Into the house, all of you. The wards are at full strength, but if what you say is true, the night has ears. Inside, the Potter home was a labyrinth of books, bubbling cauldrons, and comfortable armchairs. Harry felt a sense of peace he hadn't known since the tent in the Forest of Dean, but he couldn't let himself settle. Not yet. Bellatrix sat on the edge of a velvet sofa, looking entirely out of place. Euphemia handed her a cup of tea with a kindness that seemed to confuse the girl more than a curse would have. You're a Potter, Fleement said, sitting across from Harry. It wasn't a question, I can feel the resonance. But you aren't any Potter I know. And you carry a scent of time that hasn't happened yet. I'm your grandson, Harry said, deciding that the truth was the only weapon he had left. My father is James, my mother is Lily Evans. I've come back from a time where Voldemort won the First War, only to be stopped by a fluke. And then rose again to turn the world into a graveyard. The room went silent. James, who had been leaning against the mantel, nearly fell over. Sirius let out a low whistle. Bellatrix dropped her spoon, the silver clattering loudly. My son, James whispered, looking at Harry with wide, bewildered eyes. I have a son who's older than me. Time is a circle, James, Harry said, looking at his father. And right now, that circle is broken. I didn't come back to save my parents, though I hope to God I can. I came back to stop the pieces from being set on the board. He turned to Bellatrix. In my time, you were his most loyal lieutenant. You killed the man sitting next to you, he gestured to Sirius, who flinched. You tortured my friends. You lost everything that made you human. Bellatrix's face was ashen. I would never kill Sirius. He's a blood traitor, but he's blood. You did, Harry said firmly. Because you let Riddle convince you that blood didn't matter as much as power. But tonight, you chose differently. You chose him over the Dark Lord. What do we do now? Sirius asked, his voice uncharacteristically grim. If he knows about Harry, he won't stop. He'll burn Godric's Hollow to the ground to get to him. He'll try, Harry said, standing up. He felt a surge of strength as the Potter family magic fed into his weary soul. But we have something he doesn't understand. We have the knowledge of his soul. Fleement, I need a wand. Any wand will do for now, but I need to channel. Fleement nodded, walking to a locked cabinet. He pulled out a slender rod of black walnut. This belonged to my grandfather. It's stubborn, but powerful. Try it. Harry took the wand. The moment his fingers closed around the wood, a shower of gold and red sparks erupted, illuminating the room. It wasn't the holly and phoenix feather, but it was enough. It was a weapon. Tomorrow, Harry said, his eyes flashing with a cold, green fire, we go to Hogwarts. We meet Dumbledore, and then, we start hunting the Horcruxes. Quote, Bellatrix looked up, her dark eyes searching his. Horcruxes, what are those? The reason he can't die, Harry replied. And the reason you're going to help me kill him. You know where the records are kept, Bella. You know the vaults of the ancient houses. You're going to be the key to his undoing. Bellatrix stood up, her jaw setting in a line of defiance that Harry recognized, but this time, it was directed at the dark. If he wants a war, she whispered, I'll show him what a daughter of the House of Black can do when she has nothing left to lose. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. The Gates of Wisdom. The morning at Godric's Hollow broke with a pale, wintry sun that struggled to pierce the thick mist clinging to the hedgerows. Inside the Potter Manor, the atmosphere was frantic yet disciplined. Fleement and Euphemia had spent the night reinforcing the ancient wards, while James and Sirius, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and the sheer absurdity of the situation, had practiced defensive drills in the hallway until the early hours. Harry stood by the window, watching the frost melt. He felt the black walnut wand humming in his sleeve. It wasn't his old friend, but it was a willing soldier. "We're leaving," Bellatrix said, stepping into the room. She was dressed in dragon-hide traveling gear provided by Euphemia, her wild hair pulled back into a severe, practical braid. She looked less like a socialite and more like a partisan. "The flow is monitored, isn't it? By the Ministry and likely by Riddle's spies," Harry said, turning to her. "We can't go straight to Dumbledore's office. We'll take the carriage to Hogsmeade and walk the rest of the way. I need to see the castle before I see him. I need to feel if the wards are still untainted." "You talk about Hogwarts as if it's a person," Bellatrix noted, her eyes tracing the new lines of stress on Harry's face. "To me, it was the only home I had for a long time," Harry replied. The journey was silent. James and Sirius insisted on coming, despite Harry's protests. The Marauders were nothing if not stubborn, and seeing Harry, the man who claimed to be James's son, was a mystery they refused to abandon. They sat packed into the carriage, a strange tableau of the past and a broken future. As they crested the final hill, the silhouette of Hogwarts rose from the mist. It was majestic, timeless, and for Harry, heartbreakingly beautiful. "Halt!" a voice rang out as they reached the perimeter. It was Alistair Moody, much younger, with both eyes intact and only a few scars marring his rugged face. He was flanked by two other Aurors, their wands leveled at the carriage. "Identify yourselves," Moody barked. "It's James Potter, Alistair. And Sirius Black. Don't get your knickers in a twist," Sirius shouted. Leaning out the window, Moody's eyes didn't soften. "And the woman, that's Bellatrix Black. There's word she vanished from Malfoy Manor after a riot last night. Word is she's turned traitor, or she's a plant." Harry stepped out of the carriage. The moment his feet hit the soil of the school grounds, he felt the castle's magic rush to meet him. It was a physical warmth, a recognate ion of the soul that had saved it once before. "She's with me, or Moody," Harry said. Moody squinted, his hand tightening on his wand. "And who the hell are you? You've got the look of a Potter but the eyes of a man who's died twice." "A fair assessment," Harry said calmly. "We're here to see Dumbledore. Tell him the guest of the Vale has arrived. He'll know what it means." Moody hesitated. Hen signaled for one of his subordinates to send a Patronus. Moments later, the massive iron gates creaked open, moving of their own accord. The walk up to the castle was a gauntlet of memories for Harry. He saw the great hall doors and remembered the bodies laid out in rows. He saw the towers and remembered the falling silhouette of the man he was about to meet. They were led not to the headmaster's office, but to a private side chamber near the Transfiguration classroom. Albus Dumbledore was waiting for them. He looked remarkably similar to the man Harry knew, though his beard was shorter and more auburn than silver. His blue eyes, however, were exactly the same, piercing, twinkling, and hiding 1,000 secrets. "James, Sirius, Miss Black," Dumbledore said, bowing his head slightly. Then his gaze settled on Harry. The twinkle vanished, replaced by an expression of profound, scholarly shock. "And you, I felt your arrival in the ley lines last night. It was as if the sun had decided to rise in the west." "Professor," Harry said, his voice cracking slightly, "I've gone a long way to find you." "I suspect you have," Dumbledore whispered. He gestured to the others. "Minerva is waiting in the next room with tea and, I suspect, a great many questions for James and Sirius. If you would be so kind. I must speak with our guest alone." Bellatrix lingered, her hand brushing Harry's arm. "Don't let him talk you into a corner. Potter, he's a weaver of webs." "I know," Harry said with a faint smile. "I was one of his spiders." Once the room was cleared, Dumbledore sat behind a small wooden table. He didn't offer a lemon drop. He simply watched Harry. "You are wearing a Potter ring that hasn't been forged yet," Dumbledore observed. "And you carry the resonance of 3 Hallows, thou. Only one is currently in your possession. Or rather, you are the Hallow. I am the Master of Death, Professor. At least, I was. In my time, I used them to end a war that you started and Riddle finished." Harry didn't hold back. He told Dumbledore everything, the Horcruxes, the prophecy, the betrayal of Snape, and the final walk into the forest. He told him about the life he had lived and the death he had embraced. Dumbledore listened in a silence so absolute it was haunting. When Harry finished, the old wizard looked older than Harry had ever seen him. He looked at his own hand, the one that, in another world, would be blackened and dead from a ring curse. So, Dumbledore said softly, I sought the Hallows and found only a curse. And you sought only to save your friends and found the Hallows. It is a poetic, if cruel, irony. Quote, I'm not here for poetry, Harry said, leaning forward. I'm here for the locket, the cup, the diadem, the snake, and the diary. And I'm here for the ring. We have to destroy them now, before he realizes someone is hunting him. And Miss Black, Dumbledore asked, why bring her into the light? Because she's the only one who can get us into the places he's hidden them, Harry said. And because she deserves a chance to be more than a nightmare. Dumbledore stood, walking to the window. You have changed the weave of time, Harry. By saving her, you have already unmade the future you knew. The Voldemort of this world will be more desperate, more erratic. He has lost his most talented pupil. Let him be desperate, Harry said, his green eyes burning. A desperate man makes mistakes. And I've spent a lifetime learning how to capitalize on them. Very well, Dumbledore said, turning back with a spark of the old fire in his eyes. Where do we begin? Hufflepuff's cup, Harry said. It's in the Lestrange vault. And for that, we're going to need Bellatrix to commit the greatest crime a Black can imagine. And what is that? Betraying the Gringotts blood wards, Harry replied. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. The Blood of the Vaults. The plan was madness. To break into Gringotts was a suicide mission, to do so in 1970, when the Goblin wards were at their most ancient and volatile, was worse. But as Harry stood in the dimly lit room of requirement, which had provided a perfect tactical planning center, he saw that madness was the only currency they had left. The Lestrange vault is in the deepest level, Bellatrix said, her finger tracing a jagged line on a piece of parchment. She was flanked by James and Sirius, who were looking at her with a newfound, albeit wary, respect. It is protected by a dragon, yes, but more importantly, by the thief's downfall and the Geminio and Flagranti curses. Touch anything but the cup, and the vault will bury you in searing, multiplying gold. Quote, I've been there, Harry said, his voice grim. But last time, I had a goblin on my back and a dragon to ride out. This time, we do it differently. How? Sirius asked. You can't exactly walk into the lobby and ask for the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. No, Harry said, looking at Bellatrix. But a Black can walk into Gringotts. The Lestranges and the Blacks share a blood registry for their high-security vaults. It's an old pact, designed so that if one line failed, the other could preserve the purity of the Horde. Bellatrix stiffened. To use that cord without the head of house's permission is a death sentence in Goblin law. They'll keep my head for their trophy wall. Not if we're fast, Harry countered. And not if we have help from the inside. He looked toward the shadows of the room where Albus Dumbledore stood, his hands tucked into his sleeves. The headmaster had been uncharacteristically quiet, watching the young rebels with a look of profound sorrow. I have reached out to certain contacts, Dumbledore said. Griphook is young in this era, but his family has long felt the sting of the Dark Lord's rising influence. They know that if Riddle takes the ministry, the goblins will be the first to lose their autonomy. He will help us bypass the main lobby. So, the plan, James said, leaning over the table. Bella goes in as herself, the grieving, jilted bride-to-be, claiming she needs to retrieve a family heirloom before her wedding. Harry and I under the invisibility cloak. Harry pulled the shimmering fabric of the cloak from his bag. James's eyes went wide. That's my father's cloak. How do you have it? In my time, you gave it to me, Harry said softly. Or rather, Dumbledore gave it to me on your behalf. It's been in our family for centuries, James. It's a hallow. James reached out, his fingers brushing the fabric. He looked at Harry, and for a moment, the gap between stranger and son vanished. There was a tether of blood and destiny that no amount of time travel could sever. Right, Sirius said, breaking the tension. And what do I do? Stay here and keep the tea warm. You and Peter and Remus are the distraction, Harry said. He felt a pang of guilt at mentioning Peter, but the boy was still a marauder here, still innocent of the betrayals to come. You need to cause a scene in Diagon Alley. Something loud, something ministry-related. Draw the Aurors and the Watchers away from the bank's entrance. Loud, we can do loud, Sirius grinned, though his eyes remained sharp. The execution began at noon. Diagon Alley was bustling with witches in heavy cloaks, the air smelling of roasted chestnuts and damp stone. Suddenly, a series of massive, multicolored explosions rocked the cobblestones near Flourish and Blots. A swarm of Potter's patented pyrotechnics, a prototype James had been working on, filled the sky with screaming dragons made of smoke. In the chaos, a hooded Bellatrix Black strode into Gringotts. She didn't look like a girl on the run, she looked like a queen of the dark. Her chin was high, her sneer perfected. Behind her, invisible and silent, Harry and James followed. I wish to access the Lestrange vault, Bellatrix told the goblin at the high desk. Her voice was like ice. There is a matter of a dowry gift that requires my immediate attention. The goblin, a sharp-featured clerk named Ragnok, peered over his spectacles. The Lestrange vault requires the presence of Rodolphus Lestrange, Miss Black. Rodolphus is currently indisposed at Malfoy Manor, she snapped. I am his betrothed, and by the blood pact of 1294, the House of Black has secondary access. Or would you like to explain to my father why you are questioning the rights of the ancient houses? The goblin hesitated. The mention of the 1294 pact was a deep-cut piece of wizarding law that Harry had coached her on. Ragnok signaled to a younger goblin, Griphook. Take her to the depths, Ragnok grumbled. The cart ride was a blur of stalactites and freezing wind. When they reached the thief's downfall, the waterfall of clear, enchanted water, Harry felt his heart hammer against his ribs. Jump, Harry hissed. They threw themselves from the cart just as it passed through the falls. Bellatrix landed hard, her glamour fading for a split second before she regained her composure. Griphook stopped the cart, his black eyes darting to the empty space where he knew the others were hiding. Be quick, the goblin whispered. The dragon is hungry today. The Lestrange vault door hissed open. Inside, the mountain of gold gleamed with a sickly, cursed light. High on a shelf, nestled between a silver armor set and a stack of cursed books, sat the cup of Helga Hufflepuff. It practically radiated a dark, oily energy, the fragment of Voldemort's soul. Don't touch anything, Harry warned, his voice a ghost of a sound. He used the black walnut wand to levitate a small, lead-lined box he'd brought. Carefully, he maneuvered the cup into the box without making physical contact. The moment the lid snapped shut, the oppressive weight in the room lifted slightly. We have it, Harry breathed. Not so fast, a cold voice echoed from the tunnel. Bellatrix spun around, her wand out. Standing at the entrance, his face twisted in a mask of betrayal and fury, was Rodolphus Lestrange. Behind him stood two other Death Eaters, their masks glinting in the torchlight. Bella, Rodolphus said, his voice trembling with rage. The Dark Lord said you would come here. He said you were a thief. I didn't believe him. I told him my bride would never sink so low. I am not your bride, Rodolphus, Bellatrix said, her voice steady. And I am not his slave. Move aside. You've cost me everything, Rodolphus roared, raising his wand. Avada, Expelliarmus, Harry roared, shedding the cloak. The disarming charm was so powerful it didn't just take Rodolphus's wand, it threw him 10 feet back against the stone wall. James appeared beside him, his wand a blur of motion as he cast a powerful shield to block the return fire from the other Death Eaters. Go, get the cup out of here, James yelled. Not without you, Harry shouted. Bella, take the box. Harry shoved the lead-lined container into her hands. Griphook, the cart, now. The exit was a chaotic symphony of spells and goblin shouts. They didn't take the cart. They took the only other way out. Harry blasted the chains of the blind, pale dragon guarding the lower levels. Get on, Harry commanded, as the dragon spread its massive, scarred wings and began its ascent through the central shaft. Bellatrix clung to Harry's waist, the cup of Hufflepuff clutched to her chest. She looked down at the gold and the fire below, then up at the sliver of blue sky visible at the top of the bank. She was a thief. She was a traitor. And for the first time in her life, as she rode a dragon out of the belly of the earth with Harry Potter, she felt truly, terrifyingly free. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Breaking of the Soul. The dragon crashed through the glass dome of Gringotts, a gargantuan shard of white scales and ancient fury. On its back, Harry, Bellatrix, and James clung to the jagged ridges of its spine as the beast surged into the London sky. Below, the screams of Diagon Alley faded into the rush of wind, replaced by the right HMIC thrum of wings that hadn't seen open air in decades. We need to jump, Harry yelled over the gale, his hair whipped into a frenzy. Are you insane? Bellatrix screamed back, her fingers WH-ITE knuckled as she clutched the lead-lined box containing the cup. We're hundreds of feet up. Trust me, Harry looked at James, who was grinning with a terrifying, reckless joy. On 3, James shouted. 1, 2, 3. They tumbled off the dragon's flank just as it leveled over the Thames. Harry grabbed Bellatrix's hand in midair, the other reaching for James. With a gut-wrenching tug behind his navel, he apparated them directly into the safety of the Forest of Dean. They hit the forest floor hard, rolling through damp leaves and pine needles. The silence of the woods was a physical weight after the roar of the bank. I think I'm going to be sick," James groaned, sprawling on his back. Bellatrix scrambled to her feet, immediately checking the box. She looked at Harry, our eyes wide with a mixture of adrenaline and dawning horror. "We did it. We actually robbed Gringotts. My father, he'll burn my name off the tapestry before the sun sets." "Let him," Harry said, Santa. Nding up and brushing the dirt from his robes. "That tapestry is a map of dead ends, Bella. You're making a new path." He took the box from her and set it on a flat stone. From his pocket, he pulled out a small, jagged piece of dark glass, a fragment of the shattered time turner, still humming with chronological energy. He had been working on a way to destroy Horcruxes without basilisk venom or fiendfire, something more surgical. "What are you doing?" James asked, sitting up. "I'm going to bleed it dry," Harry replied. He looked at Bellatrix. "I need your help. This soul fragment is anchored to the cup, but it feeds on the pride of the house that holds it. You're a Black, but you're also a woman who was supposed to be a Lestrange. Your rejection of that destiny is a poison to this thing." Bellatrix stepped forward, her face pale. "What do I have to do?" "Place your hands on the box. Focus on the moment you chose to leave Malfoy Manor. Focus on the feeling of the wind when we were on that dragon. The feeling of not belonging to anyone but yourself." Harry pointed the black walnut wand at the box. He began a low, rhythmic chant in a language that sounded like the rustle of dry leaves. It wasn't Parseltongue, but something older, the language of the Peverells. The box began to rattle. A thick, black smoke started to seep from the seams, curling like a dying serpent. A high, piercing scream erupted from the metal, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in their marrow. "It's fighting back," James yelled, reaching for his wand. "Stay back, James," Harry commanded. "Bella, don't let go." Bellatrix's face was contorted in pain. The smoke was coiling around her wrists, trying to find a way into her mind, whispering promises of power, of her father's love, of Rodolphus's devotion. "It's lying," Harry shouted. "It's nothing but a shadow." "I know," Bellatrix roared, her dark eyes flashing with a sudden, brilliant light. "I am Bellatrix Black. I am no one's shadow." With a final, desperate surge of magic, Harry slammed the wand tip against the lead. A flash of emerald light exploded through the clearing. The scream reached a crescendo and then snapped into a hollow silence. The box fell open. The cup of Helga Hufflepuff lay inside, its gold dull and tarnished, the oily aura gone. It was just a cup now. An artifact, but no longer a vessel for a monster. Bellatrix collapsed, Harry catching her before she hit the ground. She was shaking, her skin cold to the touch. "Is it gone?" she whispered. "One down," Harry said, his voice weary but triumphant. He looked at the ruined cup, then at the girl in his arms. She had done it. She had faced the very essence of the man she once worshipped and chose her own soul instead. James walked over, looking at the two of them with a strange, contemplative expression. "You really are from the future, aren't you? Nobody learns that kind of magic at Hogwarts." "I learned it in a tent, in the woods, while the world was ending," Harry said. He looked at James, his father, and felt a pang of longing. "But maybe this time, the world won't have to end. We should get back to the castle," James said, his tone turning serious. "Sirius and the others will be wondering if we're dead or in a cell." "Not yet," Harry said, standing up and helping Bellatrix to her feet. "There's one more thing we need to do before the Dark Lord realizes what we've taken. The diadem is at Hogwarts. The ring is at the Gaunt Shack. But the diary is with Abraxas Malfoy. Lucius's father," Bellatrix breathed. "He guards it like his own life. Then we'll just have to make him choose," Harry said, a cold edge returning to his voice. "His life, or his master's secret." As they prepared to apparate, Harry felt a shift in the air. The Horcrux's destruction had sent a ripple through the magic of Britain. Somewhere, in a dark manor or a hidden cave, Tom Riddle had just felt a piece of himself die. The hunter was now the hunted. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Malfoy Gambit. The destruction of the cup had left a vacuum in the magical atmosphere, a shivering silence that Harry knew Voldemort would be frantically trying to interpret. They couldn't return to Hogwarts yet, the school was too public, and Dumbledore, for all his brilliance, was still bound by the politics of the Ministry. To strike at the diary, they needed to be ghosts. Abraxas Malfoy is not like Rodolphus, Bellatrix warned as they huddled beneath a rocky outcropping in the Forest of Dean. She was pale, the strain of the Horcrux's expulsion still lining her face. But her eyes were sharper than ever. He is a weaver of golden whispers. He won't fight you in the street. He'll bury you in a legal tomb before you can draw your wand. He has the diary, Harry said, cleaning the black walnut wand with a piece of silk. In my time, he gave it to Lucius, who eventually slipped it to a young girl to reopen the Chamber of Secrets. It's a weapon as much as a soul container. If we take it, we take away Riddle's influence over the next generation. James was pacing the perimeter, his wand out, scanning the trees. How do we get into Malfoy Manor twice in 48 hours? They'll have reinforced the wards with blood sacrifices by now. We don't go to the manor, Harry said. Abraxas has a secondary estate, a summer house, in Wiltshire that he uses for his private dealings. A friend once told me that's where the Malfoys keep the things they don't want the Dark Lord to see. Narcissa, Bellatrix whispered. She told me about it. He said the cellar was filled with things that screamed in the dark. Then that's where we're going, Harry said. But we aren't going as a strike team. We're going as a delivery. 2 hours later, Ari and Bellatrix stood before the iron gates of the Wiltshire estate. James was hidden nearby, under the cloak, ready to provide cover. Harry had used a powerful transfiguration to alter his features, shifting his jawline and darkening his eyes until he looked less like a Potter and more like a hardened mercenary from the continent. Bellatrix, however, wore no disguise. She wore the tattered remains of her dignity-like armor. "Open the gates," she commanded, her voice ringing out through the mist. "I have a message for Abraxas from the House of Black." The gates groaned open, sensing her blood. They walked up the drive, the house looming ahead, a jagged, Gothic structure that looked like a bird of prey perched on a cliff. Abraxas Malfoy met them in the entrance hall. He was older than Lucius, his hair a shock of white gold. His face a map of refined cruelty. He held a cane topped with a silver serpent, and his eyes flickered with a lethal boredom. "Bellatrix," Abraxas said, his voice a dry rasp. "The girl the world is talking about. The girl who broke the Dark Lord's hospitality and rode a dragon through the roof of a bank. Why are you here? To beg for a quick death. I'm here to offer you a deal, Abraxas," Bellatrix said, stepping forward. "The Dark Lord is losing. You felt it this afternoon, didn't you? That shiver in the dark. That was a piece of his immortality turning to ash." Abraxas's hand tightened on his cane. "You speak treason. I speak math," Harry interrupted, stepping out from behind her. "You're a businessman, Malfoy. You back the winner. Right now, your lord is a man who's falling apart. We have the cup. We have the knowledge of the others. When he falls, do you want the Malfoy name to fall with him?" Abraxas looked at Harry, his eyes narrowing. "You're the one from the manor. The French cousin. You carry a power that smells of the grave, boy." "I carry the end of Tom Riddle," Harry said. "Give us the diary, the black book he gave you for safekeeping. In return, I'll ensure that when the Ministry falls on the Death Eaters, the Malfoys are seen as undercover agents who helped bring him down. I have the headmaster's word." Abraxas laughed, a sound like dry parchment rubbing together. "Dumbledore, you think a promise from an old man is worth the life of my son? If I give you that book, Riddle will flay Lucius alive." "He'll do that anyway," Bellatrix said, her voice softening with a rare flash of empathy. "The moment he realizes you can't protect his secrets, you're all dead. At least with us, you have a chance to run." Abraxas turned away, staring at a portrait of his ancestors. The silence stretched until Harry could hear the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. "It's in the study," Abraxas said suddenly, his voice hollow. "Behind the bust of Merlin. There is a hidden compartment keyed to the Malfoy seal." He turned back, his face a mask of cold desperation. "Take it and leave. If you are caught, I will deny everything and hunt you myself." Harry didn't wait. He moved to the study, Bellatrix at his side. He found the bust, pressed his thumb to the seal, and the stone slid away. Inside lay a simple, black leather diary. It looked harmless, but to Harry's senses, it pulsed with a rhythmic, sickening heartbeat. "Got it," Harry breathed. As they turned to leave, the front doors of the estate exploded. Abraxas, you old fool. The voice was high, cold, and filled with a murderous glee. Voldemort hadn't sent his servants this time. He had come himself. The air in the house became instantly freezing, the shadows lengthening and twisting into claws. Go, Abraxas yelled, drawing his wand. Out the back. The wards are down. Harry and Bellatrix sprinted through the kitchens, the sound of a duel erupting behind them, the roar of fiendfire and the crack of shattering stone. They burst into the garden just as Voldemort stepped into the study. Potter! The Dark Lord roared, his voice echoing across the grounds. Harry didn't look back. He grabbed Bellatrix's hand and James's invisible shoulder. They apparated just as a jet of green light vaporized the garden gate. They landed back in the Forest of Dean, gasping for air. Harry held the diary aloft. It was vibrating, the ink inside seemingly trying to scream through the leather. He knows, Harry said, his face grim. He knows exactly what we're doing now. The game of shadows is over. It's a race to the finish. Where next? James asked, his face pale but his eyes burning with the fire of a true marauder. The Gaunt Shack, Harry said. The ring. It's the most dangerous one. But it's the one he'll protect with his life. Because it's not just a Horcrux, it's his heritage. Bellatrix looked at the diary, then at Harry. He was so close, Harry. I could feel him. The cold. It's like nothing else. It's just a man, Bella, Harry said, though his hand was shaking. A man who's about to find out that even kings can bleed. End of Chapter 10. Chapter 11. The Rot in the Roots. The Little Hangleton Woods were a stark contrast to the lush grounds of Potter Manor. Here, the trees grew stunted and twisted, their branches interlocking like the skeletal fingers of a drowning man. The air tasted of wet earth and ancient, stagnant resentment. This place is foul, Sirius whispered, his wand tip glowing with a low lumos. He had insisted on joining the primary team, leaving Remus and Peter to guard the perimeter of the forest. It smells like a family that stayed in the dark for too long. Because it is, Harry said, leading the way. The Gounts were the last descendants of Slytherin. They lived in their own filth and called it royalty. It's where Tom Riddle's mother came from, and it's where he hid his most precious vanity. Bellatrix walked close to Harry's side. She had changed. The haughty mask was gone, replaced by a grim, focused intensity. She had spent the last hour studying the diary Harry held, watching the way it seemed to pulse in his grip. The ring is different, isn't it? She asked. The cup felt greedy, but this feels hungry. It's a trap, Harry warned. The ring carries a curse of the flesh. In my time, it took Albus Dumbledore's hand and, eventually, his life. We don't touch it, we don't even look at it directly if we can help it. They reached the shack. It was a ruin, overgrown with nettles and briars, the door hanging by a single rusted hinge. A dead snake was nailed to the wood, a warning in a language only a few could speak. Open, Harry hissed in Parseltongue. The door creaked inward. The interior was a nightmare of dust and decay. Harry scanned the floorboards, his magical sight picking up the shimmering, golden threads of a lethal protection spell. There, Harry pointed to a loose floorboard beneath a heavy, rotting table. The gold thread. It's a wither curse. If your skin so much as brushes the air around it, your blood turns to lead. Let me, James said, stepping forward with a silver flask of liquid. My father's specialty. A localized potion of dissolution. It eats through enchantments without triggering the rebound. James poured the potion with the steady hand of a seeker. The golden threads hissed and evaporated, leaving a hole in the magical weave. Harry used a levitation charm to lift the floorboard. Inside a small, velvet-lined box sat a heavy gold ring, inset with a black stone. The stone bore a symbol that made Harry's breath hitch, a triangle, a circle, and a line. The resurrection stone. The Peverell crest, Sirius breathed, leaning in. Wait, no, that's the mark of the Deathly Hallows. It's both, Harry said. He felt the pull of the stone, the soft, seductive whisper of all the people he had lost. Sirius, Remus, Fred, Mom, Dad, he could bring them back. He could have the family he never knew. Harry. Bellatrix's voice was sharp, cutting through the fog in his mind. She grabbed his shoulder. Your eyes. They're turning black. Step back. Harry blinked, the cold reality of the shack rushing back. He shook his head, his heart racing. I'm fine. It's the stone. It plays on what you want most. Then let's destroy it and get out of here, James said. His face etched with worry. We can't destroy the stone, Harry said. It's a hallow. It's indestructible. But the ring, the gold is the Horcrux. He placed the diary and the ring on the table. He took the black walnut wand and held it high. We need to do this together. This is the heart of his legacy. If we break this, he loses his connection to his ancestors. He becomes just a man again. Harry, James, Sirius, and Bellatrix stood in a circle around the table. They joined hands, Harry's wand at the center. On my mark, Harry commanded. Channel everything you have, your anger at what he's done, your hope for what comes next. Give it to me. He began the Peverell chant again, but this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a roar. The magic in the room thickened until it was visible, a swirling vortex of silver, red, and emerald light. The ring began to scream. Not a human scream, but the sound of metal being torn apart by a god. The black stone glowed with a terrifying, violet light, resisting the dissolution. He's coming, Sirius yelled, his eyes fixed on the door. Outside, the sky had turned a bruised purple. A high, cold laugh echoed through the trees. Voldemort had tracked the surge of magic. He was here. Don't break the circle, Harry shouted, his skin beginning to smoke from the sheer volume of power he was channeling. Hold on. The ring cracked. A fountain of black, oily ichor erupted from the gold, splashing across the table. At the same moment, the front wall of the shack was blasted inward. Voldemort stood in the wreckage, his face a mask of absolute, inhuman fury. He looked at the ring, then at Harry. You, Voldemort bellowed, you dare touch the blood of my fathers. Your fathers were cowards, Tom. Harry yelled back, his wand still pointed at the ring. And you're just the last of a dying line. With a final, explosive surge of magic, the gold ring shattered into 1,000 pieces. The black stone fell to the table, inert. The backlash threw everyone against the walls. Harry scrambled to his feet, grabbing the stone and shoving it into his pocket. Go, apparate, Harry commanded. Not this time, Voldemort hissed. He raised his wand, the U-wand. The brother to the one Harry had once owned. Sectum Sempra. Quote. The dark curse slashed through the air. James dived in front of Sirius, taking the hit across his chest. No, Harry screamed. He didn't think. He didn't use a spell. He threw himself at Voldemort, his hands glowing with the raw, white light of the Master of Death. The two collided in a burst of kinetic energy that leveled the remaining walls of the shack. In the chaos, Bellatrix grabbed the bleeding James and the stunned Sirius. She looked at Harry, who was locked in a struggle of pure will with the Dark Lord. Harry, she cried out. Go, Harry roared, his eyes glowing with an unearthly green fire. I'll find you at the castle. With a sob of frustration, Bellatrix twisted, pulling the Marauders into the void. Harry turned back to Voldemort. They were alone in the ruins of the Gaunt Heritage. The Dark Lord's face was inches from his own, the smell of death and ozone overwhelming. You think you can save them? Voldemort whispered, his grip on Harry's throat tightening. You are a ghost, Harry Potter. And ghosts belong to me. I'm not a ghost, Tom, Harry gasped, a bloody smile spreading across his face. I'm the one who's already finished the book. And you're on the last page. Harry jammed the black walnut wand into Voldemort's chest and let out a pulse of magic that felt like his own soul tearing. The world went white. End of Chapter 11. Chapter 12. The White Space and the Serpent's Shadow. The world didn't end in fire, it ended in a vast, echoing silence. Harry opened his eyes to find Hymns Elf in a place that looked remarkably like King's Cross Station, though the ceilings were higher, and the white marble floor seemed to glow from within. It was the same limbo he had visited years, or decades, ago. But this time, the platform wasn't empty. The small, flayed, childlike thing that was Voldemort's soul sat whimpering beneath a bench, but it was smaller than before. Much smaller. It was a shriveled husk. Barely the size of a fist. It's getting harder for him to come back, isn't it? Harry turned. Standing there wasn't the Albus Dumbledore he had just left at Hogwarts, but the older, silver-bearded Dumbledore of his original timeline. He wore his star-swept robes and a gentle, knowing smile. Professor, Harry breathed, the weight of the war momentarily lifting from his shoulders. Am I dead again? A temporary transition, I believe, Dumbledore said, peering over his half-moon spectacles at the crying soul fragment. You channeled the resonance of 3 Horcruxes and the power of the Resurrection Stone simultaneously. Even for a Master of Death, that is quite the shock to the system. James, Sirius, they got out. They did, thanks to Miss Black, a fascinating pivot in the tapestry. Harry, you have done more than save a life, you have altered the nature of the war. Voldemort is no longer a shadow master. He is a wounded animal, and wounded animals are at their most dangerous when cornered. He's still got the diadem, Harry said, looking at his hands. They were translucent. And the snake, and the piece inside him, and the piece inside you, Dumbledore added softly. Harry flinched. I thought because I came back, because I was the master, it wouldn't be there. But I felt it in the shack. I felt him. It is the tether, Harry. But here is the beauty of your choice. In this era, the soul piece is not yet fully anchored by the death of your parents. It is a loose thread. If you can destroy the remaining vessels, the piece within you will have nowhere to go but the void when you face him. I have to go back, Harry said, his voice hardening. He's going to attack the school. He's lost his heritage, his gold, and his diary. He has nothing left but the castle. Then go, Dumbledore said, stepping back into the mist. But remember, Harry, love is a shield, but choice is a sword. Bellatrix Black chose to be more than her blood. Ensure she doesn't forget why. The white light surged back, blinding and hot. Harry gasped, his lungs burning as he slammed back into the dirt of Little Hangleton. The shack was gone, replaced by a smoking crater. Voldemort was gone, too. Likely retreated to the shadows to lick his wounds and gather the remnants of his army. Harry stood up, his bones aching. He reached into his pocket and felt the cold, smooth surface of the resurrection stone. He pulled it out, looking at it in the moonlight. He didn't turn it. He didn't call for his mother or father. He simply closed his fist around it and apparated. He arrived at the gates of Hogwarts to a scene of total mobilization. The sky above the castle was a dome of shimmering blue-gold protective charms. Aurors were patrolling the battlements, and he could see the tiny figures of students being moved toward the Great Hall. He was intercepted at the entrance by a frantic, blood-stained Sirius. Harry, you're alive, you crazy bastard, you're alive. Sirius lunged forward, catching Harry in a rib-crushing hug. James, how is he? Harry asked, pulling back. The healers are with him. It was a nasty curse, but he's a Potter, he's too stubborn to die, Sirius said. Though his eyes were wet. And Bella, Harry, she's gone mental. She's in the room of requirement. She says she knows where the last piece is. Harry sprinted through the corridors, his heart hammering. He pushed through the crowds of terrified fifth years and arrived at the 7th floor corridor. Bellatrix was there, pacing back and forth in front of the blank wall. It's here, she said the moment she saw him. She didn't offer a greeting. Her eyes were wild, but not with the madness of his future. It was the frantic clarity of someone who had finally seen the truth. He boasted to me once. In a different life, or a dream, he spoke of a place where things are hidden. A place where the Founders' secrets rest. The diadem of Ravenclaw, Harry said. The door to T.H. room of hidden things shimmered into existence. They stepped inside, the mountain of discarded junk and ancient artifacts looming over them like a graveyard of history. We find it, we burn it, and then we wait for him, Harry said. He's already here, Harry, Bellatrix whispered, looking toward the high windows. Far in the distance, past the Forbidden Forest, a line of green light was rising. Voldemort wasn't coming with a subtle infiltration. He was coming with the full might of the Death Eaters, the giants, and the werewolves. He was coming to tear down the only home Harry had ever known. Let him come, Harry said, his green eyes reflecting the distant fire. I've died in this castle once. I don't plan on doing it again. End of Chapter 12. Chapter 13. The Siege of Ancient Stones. The air over Hogwarts didn't just vibrate. It hummed with the agonizing tension of a bowstring pulled past its limit. Above, the protective dome cast by Dumbledore and the staff rippled under a constant rain of dark fire. From the high windows of the Room of Hidden Things, Harry and Bellatrix watched the forest line. The darkness there wasn't natural, it was the massed shadows of the Death Eater legions. A sea of masks glinting in the cold moonlight. He's desperate, Bellatrix said, her voice a low, dangerous rasp. She held her wand with a white-knuckled grip, her eyes scanning the mountains of clutter. He's throwing everything he has at the gates because he knows his time is leaking away. We find the diadem, or none of it matters, Harry replied. He closed his eyes, extending his senses. He didn't look for the object with his eyes, he looked for the rot. A Horcrux was a puncture in reality, a cold spot in the world's warmth. He felt it, high atop a tottering pillar of furniture and bust-laden shelves, a faint, rhythmic throb echoed in his mind. There, Harry pointed. They climbed the shifting landscape of discarded history. At the summit, resting atop a pockmarked stone bust of an old warlock, sat the diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw. Even under the layers of dust, the sapphires pulsed with a sickly, malevolent radiance. "It's beautiful," Bellatrix whispered, reaching out. "I can see why he chose it. To take something so pure and fill it with such hate." "Don't touch it, Bella," Harry warned. He didn't have fiendfire, and the basilisk was still sleeping in the deep. But he had the resurrection stone in his pocket and the black walnut wand in his hand. He channeled the cold, absolute authority of the Master of Death. "Finita incantatem maxima," Harry roared. He didn't just cast a spell. He projected the concept of ending. The wand tip erupted with a beam of pure, colorless light. The diadem didn't just break, it shrieked. A ghostly, translucent version of a young Tom Riddle rose from the metal. His face twisted in a silent scream of agony as the sapphire shattered. A plume of black smoke erupted, dissipating into the rafters. "For," Harry breathed, leaning against a stack of books. "The cup, the diary, the ring, and the diadem. The snake," Bellatrix reminded him. "Nagini, she's never far from him." A massive explosion rocked the castle, sending a shower of dust from the ceiling. The wards had been breached. The screams of battle drifted up from the courtyards, the clatter of stone knights joining the fray and the booming voice of Hagrid rallying the giant's kin. "We have to go down," Harry said. They sprinted through the corridors, passing students being ushered toward the tunnels. In the Great Hall, the scene was one of controlled chaos. He saw Remus Lupin and a young, fierce Lily Evans, his mother, standing side by side, casting shield charms to protect the younger years. Harry's heart skipped a beat at the sight of Lily. She looked so much like the photos, but more vibrant. Her red hair a flag of defiance in the gloom. She saw him and for a second, their eyes met. There was no recognition of kinship, but there was a spark of shared purpose. "Harry, behind you," Sirius's voice cut through the noise. A group of Death Eaters, led by Antonin Dolohov, had smashed through the stained glass of the side hall. Bellatrix didn't hesitate. She stepped in front of Harry, her wand moving in a blur of complex, lethal arcs. She wasn't using the unforgivables, she was using the ancient, sharp-edged magic of the Black family, spells that turned the air into blades and the floor into quicksand. "You traitorous bitch," Dolohov snarled, dodging a bolt of violet light. "I am a Black," Bellatrix screamed back, her face lit with a fierce, terrifying joy. "And I am done taking orders from half-bloods and cowards." Harry joined her, his magic a perfect complement to her ferocity. Where she was fire, he was the cold, inevitable tide. They moved in a synchronized dance that left the Death Eaters reeling. Suddenly, the temperature in the Great Hall plummeted. The torches flickered and died, leaving the room in a ghostly, emerald light. The doors at the far end didn't open. They disintegrated. Lord Voldemort stepped into the hall. Nagini, the gargantuan serpent, was coiled around his shoulders like a living cloak. He didn't look at the Aurors or the teachers. His eyes, now fully red and slitted, fixed on Harry and Bellatrix. "Enough," Voldemort whispered, yet his voice carried over the roar of the battle outside. "The boy who plays with time. The girl who broke her vows. You have cost me much, but the debt is about to be paid in blood." He raised the wand. The air around him distorted with the sheer pressure of his malice. "Bella, get the snake," Harry hissed. His eyes locked on Voldemort. "I'll hold him." "Harry, he'll kill you," she whispered. "He's already tried," Harry said, stepping forward to meet his destiny for the third time. "And I'm still standing." End of Chapter 13. Chapter 14. The Dance of the Damned and the Divine. The Great Hall of Hogwarts, usually a place of feast and fellowship, had become a cathedral of carnage. The enchanted ceiling above reflected the carnage below, thunderous, charcoal clouds swirling with flashes of green lightning. Rubble from the high rafters littered the house tables, and the air was thick with the smell of scorched stone and the metallic tang of spilled magic. Voldemort glided forward, his feet barely touching the floor. The snake, Nagini, uncoiled from his shoulders, her scales hissing against the marble as she tasted the air. She was massive in this era, a prehistoric nightmare of muscle and venom. "You stand before me without a master, Bellatrix," Voldemort said, his voice a sibilant caress that made the skin crawl. "You traded the glory of an immortal empire for a boy who smells of wood smoke and failure. Tell me, does the Master of Death offer better dental than the Lestranges?" Bellatrix didn't flinch. She stood in a duelist's crouch, her wand leveled at the serpent's head. He offers a choice, Tom. Something you've never understood. I'd rather die a traitor in his world than live as a doll in yours. Then die, Voldemort hissed. He didn't cast a spell. He threw a wave of raw, kinetic hatred. The floorboards tore up in a jagged wave, hurtling toward Harry and Bellatrix. Harry slammed his wand downward, shouting, Protega horizontalis. Quote, a shimmering plane of force intercepted the debris, grinding the wood to sawdust. At the same moment, Nagini lunged. She moved with impossible speed, a blur of dark green and gold. Bellatrix dived to the left, rolling behind a fallen Gryffindor banner. Defendo, Bellatrix cried, aiming for the snake's neck. The severing charm struck the scales. But Nagini's hide had been reinforced with dark rituals. The spell merely sparked and skittered away. Harry and Voldemort were locked in a different kind of combat. They weren't trading hexes. They were fighting for control of the room's atmosphere. Voldemort's magic was a suffocating weight, a pressure that tried to collapse Harry's lungs. Harry countered with the resonance of the resurrection stone, creating a localized field of being that refused to be extinguished. You are a curiosity, Potter, Voldemort said, his wand moving in intricate, hypnotic circles. I can feel the pieces of myself you've broken. Each one was a symphony I spent decades composing. You are a vandal in the gallery of my soul. Your soul is a scrap heap, Tom. Harry countered. He lunged forward, casting a chain of spells, Reducto, Confringo, Expulso, each one timed to the heartbeat of the room. Voldemort batted them away with contemptuous ease, his movements fluid and serpentine. You cannot defeat me with schoolboy charms. I have dived into the darkest pools of magic. I have seen the stars turn cold. And I've been to the place where they go when they die, Harry shot back. Behind them, Bellatrix was engaged in a desperate game of cat and mouse with Nagini. The snake was intelligent, cornering Bellatrix against the ruined high table. Bellatrix's face was streaked with soot and blood, her breathing ragged. She saw the snake coil, preparing for the final strike. Harry, now, Bellatrix screamed. Harry knew the plan. It wasn't about power, it was about the Hallows. He reached into his pocket and gripped the resurrection stone. He didn't use it to call the dead. He used it to anchor the living. He projected the image of the woman Bellatrix was becoming, the one who chose her own fate. The stone pulsed with a blinding, white light. For a split second, the great hall was washed in a purity that Voldemort couldn't bear. He shrieked, covering his eyes as the Master of Death, energy seared his light-starved senses. In that moment of distraction, the protection around Nagini flickered. Bellatrix didn't use a wand. She grabbed a fallen silver sword, the sword of Gryffindor, which had manifested in the debris of the sorting hat near the rubble. With a primal roar of defiance, she swung the blade. The silver edge, impregnated with the venom of 1,000 victories, bit deep into Nagini's neck. The snake didn't just bleed, it dissolved. The last Horcrux, the living anchor, burst into a cloud of black, oily vapor that shrieked as it vanished into the rafters. Voldemort fell to his knees. Clutching his chest, a gout of black blood erupted from his mouth. He looked at his hands, which were beginning to turn gray and translucent at the fingertips. What have you done? He gasped, his voice breaking. I've made you mortal, Tom, Harry said, walking toward him. The black walnut wand was steady in his hand. No more anchors, no more diaries, no more shadows. It's just you in the dark now. Voldemort looked up, his red eyes filled with a terrifying, pathetic desperation. He saw Harry, he saw Bellatrix standing over the remains of his familiar. And he saw the ghosts of the Marauders, James and Sirius, emerging from the smoke at the edge of the hall, wands raised. The Dark Lord realized he was alone. For a man who built his life on the fear of others. The silence was the greatest torture of all. Finish it, Voldemort whispered, his ego finally collapsing into the void. Harry raised his wand. He didn't feel hate, he felt a profound, weary pity. Not for me, Tom. For everyone you haven't killed yet. End of Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The Dawn of a New Sun. The silence that followed Voldemort's collapse was more deafening than the roar of the siege. Across the Great Hall, the fighting stopped. Death Eaters, feeling the sudden, cold severance of their master's presence, dropped their wands in shock or fled into the night. The air, once thick with the iron tang of war, began to settle into the scent of morning dew and ancient stone. Voldemort lay on the cold floor, no longer a lord, no longer a god. He was merely Tom Riddle, A pale, broken man with hollow eyes. He didn't vanish in a cloud of ash this time. He died as he lived, terrified and alone, a fragment of a soul that had forgotten how to be human. Harry stood over him, his chest heaving. The black walnut wand was still warm in his grip, but the buzzing resonance of the hallows had gone quiet. He felt the weight of the resurrection stone in his pocket, a heavy reminder of the cost of this victory. Is it over? Bellatrix approached him, the sword of Gryffindor still clutched in her hand. Her face was a mask of grime and blood, but her eyes, once sharp with malice, were clear. She looked at the body of the man she had worshipped, and for the first time, she saw nothing but a corpse. It's over, Bella, Harry said, his voice a low rasp. The great hall began to fill with the living. James, his chest heavily bandaged but his spirit unbroken, limped forward with Sirius supporting him. Lily followed, her eyes wide as she looked from the fallen Dark Lord to the strange M. And who looked so much like the husband she hadn't yet married. You did it, James whispered, staring at Harry. I don't know how, or where you really came from, but you did it. Harry looked at his father. The urge to tell him everything, to embrace him and never let go, was a physical ache. But he saw the way James looked at Lily, the way Sirius stood tall as a man of honor rather than a prisoner, and he knew his work here was done. The timeline had been rewoven. The tragedies of his childhood had been cauterized before they could bleed. I have to go, Harry said quietly. Go. Sirius stepped forward, his brow furrowed. Where? You're a hero, mate. Your family. I don't belong here, Sirius, Harry said, a sad smile touching his lips. I was a ghost sent to fix a haunting. If I stay, the threads might tangle again. This world belongs to you now. To all of you. He turned to Bellatrix. She was watching him with an intensity that transcended words. In this world, she wasn't a murderer. She wasn't a fanatic. She was a woman who had saved the school, a daughter of the House of Black who had redeemed her name with the blood of a monster. What will you do? She asked. I'm going to find a place where there are no more wars, Harry lied gently. He knew that by leaving, he might simply cease to be, the paradox of his existence finally catching up with the new reality he'd created. He reached out and touched her hand. Take care of them, Bella. And take care of yourself. You were always brilliant. Now you get to be good. Bellatrix leaned in, her forehead resting against his for a fleeting second. I won't forget, Harry Potter. I'll make sure none of them do. Harry stepped back into the center of the hall, the morning sun finally breaking through the shattered windows. The gold light washed over the ruins, turning the rubble into amber. He took the resurrection stone and the elder wand, which had returned to him at the moment of Voldemort's death, and held them out. He didn't break them, he simply let them go. They dissolved into motes of light, returning to the earth from which they came. The Master of Death was resigning his post. Goodbye, Dad, Harry whispered, so softly only the wind could hear it. As the light became blinding, Harry felt himself fading. He saw James and Lily join hands. He saw Sirius laughing at some remark from Remus. He saw the house of Black standing tall in the light of a new day. The world shifted. The stone beneath his feet turned to mist. The screams of the past became the silence of peace. Harry Potter, the boy who lived, the man who traveled, and the ghost of a future that never was, closed his eyes and let the light take him home. End of Chapter 15. Chapter 16. The Echo of the Emerald Sun. Epilogue. 20 years had passed since the morning the stones of Hogwarts stopped screaming. The wizarding world of 1990 was a place of vibrant, chaotic growth, unrecognizable from the shadow-choked landscape Harry had fled. In this world, the name, Voldemort, was a footnote in a history book, a cautionary tale of a man who tried to steal the sun and was burned by it. In a sun-drenched office overlooking the Great Lake, the headmistress of Hogwarts sat behind a desk made of dark, polished ebony. Bellatrix Black, she had never taken the name Lestrange, looked at the stack of first-year applications. Her hair was still a wild, dark storm. Those silver threads now caught the light. She moved with a grace that was no longer lethal, but commanding. The door burst open without a knock. Bella, tell James he's being a prat. He won. Let me use the experimental beater's bats for the alumni match. Sirius Black, looking dashing and mischievous in his late 30s, lounged in the doorway. Behind him, James Potter, wearing the gold and red robes of the England Quidditch captain, grinned unrepentantly. They're a safety hazard, Sirius, James said, his glasses sliding down his nose. And Lily will have my head if you blow up the pitch again. Bellatrix looked up, a small, rare smile tugging at her lips. If the two of you don't stop bickering in my office, I'll have the house elves transfigure your brooms into giant toothbrushes. She'd do it, too. A calm voice added. Remus Lupin walked in, carrying a stack of books for his next defense against the dark arts lecture. He looked healthy, the lines of his face born of laughter rather than exhaustion. The Marauders and the Lady of Black. They were the architects of this piece. Any word from the Ministry? James asked, his expression softening as he leaned against the desk. Narcissa says the new Muggle Protection Act passed unanimously, Bellatrix replied. And Lucius is, well, Lucius is still trying to pretend he liked the idea all along. They laughed, the sound easy and warm. But as the laughter died down, their eyes collectively drifted to the mantelpiece. There, in a frame made of silver and emeralds, was a moving photograph of a young man with messy hair and brilliant green eyes. He wasn't smiling in the photo, he was looking toward the horizon with a look of profound, weary hope. Do you think he's out there somewhere? Sirius asked, his voice uncharacteristically quiet. In another, where, or, when? He didn't leave because he wanted to, James said, looking at the son he had never truly known, yet owed everything to. He left because he'd already given us everything he had. Bellatrix stood up and walked to the window. Below, on the grounds, a young boy with black hair and a girl with red hair were racing toward the Quidditch pitch. They were happy. They were safe. He isn't a ghost, Bellatrix whispered, her hand brushing the hilt of the silver sword that hung on her wall. He's the light we walk in. Suddenly, a strange ripple varied through the air, a flash of green light, no larger than a firefly, danced across the surface of the Great Lake. It didn't feel like a curse, it felt like a greeting. Bellatrix smiled, a tear Fina. LLY escaping and tracing a path through the soot-stained memories of her youth. She looked at the emerald sun setting over the mountains and knew that somewhere, in the great beyond, the Master of Death was finally resting. The story was finished. The circle was whole. End of Chapter 16. Chapter 17. The Ripple in the Veil. The year was 1998, but not the 1998 the history books had once recorded. There was no Battle of Hogwarts. There was no desperate hunt through the forests of Dean. Instead, the castle stood as a beacon of progress, its halls filled with the laughter of a generation that had never known the touch of a Dementor or the sting of a blood purity hex. In the heart of the Department of Mysteries, a place that usually remained silent and cold, the veil was twitching. Croaker, the head unspeakable, adjusted his spectacles as he watched the tattered black fabric flutter. It's been doing this for an hour, he muttered to his assistant. Since the clock struck noon. Suddenly, the air in the death chamber didn't just chill, it crystallized. A pulse of emerald light, identical to the one that had vanished decades ago at Hogwarts, erupted from the center of the archway. A figure tumbled out, landing on the stone floor with a heavy thud. The man was older now, perhaps in his mid-20s. His clothes were strange, a mix of high-quality wizarding robes and rugged, battle-worn dragonhide. He had a lightning bolt scar on his forehead that had faded to a silver line, and eyes the color of a fresh killing curse. Harry Potter stood up, shaking the dust of eternity from his shoulders. He looked around the room, his hand instinctively going to his hip for a wand that was no longer there, until he felt the familiar weight of the black walnut wand materialize in his palm. The Hallows, it seemed, were not finished with their master. Who are you? Croaker demanded, his wand raised. State your name and business. Harry ignored him. He walked out of the chamber, his boots clicking rhythmically against the floor. He moved through the ministry, past a golden statue of a lion and a serpent entwined in friendship, and up into the atrium. The world he saw was a miracle. He saw Zards in Muggle suits talking to goblins as equals. He saw a massive portrait of his father, James Potter, honored as the heir of the new age. He stepped out into London. The air was clean, the magi, cal and mundane worlds humming in a strange, beautiful harmony. He caught his reflection in a shop window and realized he didn't look like a ghost anymore. He looked like a man who had finally come home. He made his way to a small, elegant house in a quiet corner of London. The sign on the gate read, "The Black Estate." He pushed the gate open. In the garden, a woman was sitting in a high-backed chair, reading a book of advanced arithmancy. She looked up as the gate creaked. Bellatrix didn't scream. She didn't reach for her wand. She simply closed her book, her eyes filling with a recognition. It had waited 28 years to be validated. "You're late," she said, her voice rich and steady. I had to take the long way around, Harry replied, a genuine, boyish grin breaking across his face. From inside the house, a booming laugh echoed. Bella, if that's Sirius as Owl again, tell him I'm not lending him any more gold. James Potter stepped out onto the porch, his hair a mess, a plate of sandwiches in his hand. He stopped dead when he saw the man at the gate. Lily stepped out behind him, wiping her hands on an apron. She looked at Harry, really looked at him, and the sandwiches James was holding hit the floor. Harry, she whispered. Harry looked at his mother, his father, and the woman who had helped him rewrite the stars. He felt the heavy weight of the Master of Death title finally dissolve, replaced by something much simpler and infinitely more powerful. Yeah, Harry said, his voice thick with emotion. It's me. The timeline was no longer a tragedy. It was a masterpiece. And as Harry walked toward his family, the veil in the ministry finally went still, its job finished. The boy who lived had finally learned how to live. End of chapter 17. The final chapter. A legacy reclaimed. The sun dipped low over the horizon of a world that was never supposed to exist. A world born from the desperate courage of a man who chose to save his enemies as much as his friends. As golden light hit the windows of the Black estate, the shadows finally retreated, not just from the garden, but from the timeline itself. The war was a ghost. The pain was a memory. And for Harry Potter, the journey that began in a cupboard under the stairs and ended in the heart of the Marauders era was finally over. He stood at the center of a family made whole, a living testament to the fact that no fate is so dark it cannot be rewritten by a single act of mercy. Some changes do not echo. They fracture. A single choice, made in the shadow of the past, rewrote a future that was never meant to be saved. Bellatrix Black was no longer a name spoken only in fear, but a reminder that even the darkest stars were once born from light. And Harry Potter returned to his time carrying more than memories. He carried the weight of a world that might never exist. In the silence of a destiny that chose mercy over inevitability. History would move forward. Wars would still be fought. Loss would still carve its scars. But somewhere in the threads of time, one soul had been spared, and that was enough to change everything. This is Potter Nexus, where magic chooses a different path, and fate is never truly final. The past has been touched. The future is watching.